Young and daughter. We do dumplings in Nashville. Don't have a brick and mortar yet, but we are working towards that goal.
Right. And when did you start?
2021.
2021,
So,
right post-pandemic.
Yeah, like January 2021. And what's this year, 2024? Yeah, this is our 4th year.
Yeah. And then all at farmers markets.
Yes, and we're doing catering dumpling classes now.
Oh,
Cool.
Yeah.
great. So Vivek Surthy and Niall Taylor. This Taylor is 5 years old as of December, and from Nashville. My parents are from India, but I was born here, and started doing pop-up dinners in 2011. And so, like, for all intents and purposes, we were Nashville's first pop-up restaurant back then, called Veo Supper Club, and just kind of started cooking for fun, doing dinner parties, and then started doing them more, and eventually it became a full-time gig.
Ana Aguilar. I have Tantísimo and Mala Vida. So Tantísimo does Latin American farm-to-table small plates, but right now we're doing farmers markets, which is street food. I hope we can open a brick and mortar at the end of this year. Super excited about that. And then Mala Vida, we do farm-to-table bar food. And there's definitely like some family recipes kind of snuck in there too. I'm from California and my parents are from Mexico.
Colby Rasavong. Grew up here in Murfreesboro. Spent a lot of time working in fine dining restaurants, but I'm now the executive chef of Bad Idea, where I'm getting to learn a lot about myself as a person, my culture, my family, things that I ran away from as I was growing up. So at the restaurant, we get to explore what it means to be a first generation person, learning in real time.
I'm Rita Martinez, and I started and own the Salty Cubana. I was originally born in Miami, Florida, to Cuban exile parents, and when I moved to Tennessee in 2014, we were seriously lacking on the Cuban front. And during the pandemic, I was not able to go home to get these foods that made me feel warm and fuzzy. So I decided to head into the kitchen and launch Salties in March of 2021. And now we've kind of pivoted. I do classes now as well, empanada, the art of folding the empanadas. And my goal is education at this point, is to pivot the business to teach people and tell the story of the Cuban culture, because it is so blended and people don't realize we're so much more than just Spanish and what meets the eye. So yeah.
Great. Thank you all. Yeah. And now, take it away. Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to have this conversation with everybody, so thank you for taking the time to be here. I think maybe a place that we can start would just be kind of sharing the stories of how we grew up. It's like, to me, it's like I really like to know kind of where your family comes from. What were the foods that you really enjoyed growing up? As well as, what were your experiences like when you first started sharing that food at school, right? I think that one thing that really unifies the first generation movement to me is that we all have this shared experience of, we went to school, we took some food that our mom made, some kid made fun of us because it smelled funny or it smelled weird, and then we went home and we're like, hey mom, can you just make me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? But what was it for y'all growing up in a culture where it's like you kind of had your culture at home, and then you had a different culture that you grew up in outside of the home? Put it to anybody.
Oh, I'll start.
Yeah.
I was originally from Taiwan. I was born and raised. So what's the definition of first generation American?
Yeah.
That's always like something that I'm like, am I first or am I second, Well, anyway, I was born and raised. My parents are born and raised in Taiwan too. I moved here in middle school to a little town called Gallatin.
Yeah.
Gallatin from Taipei's metropolitan city to Gallatin. I didn't know any English, actually, coming to Gallatin. And then I remember going to school with my mom's food, because it's very common in Taiwan where you take mom's cooking and bring it to school. Very, very common. And I remember vividly that it gets me emotional still talking about it. I remember very well that my mom actually made sushi, but it doesn't have raw fish. It's like those roll that has like pork floss, other non-raw ingredients. So rice and seaweed, essentially. And I brought it to school, and I remember there's a girl next to me. She's like, "Oh, what is that?" I was like, "Well, it's just rice and seaweed." Because instead of saying sushi, I changed my mind. I'm like, just rice and seaweed. She was like, "Oh," like with a disgusted face. She's like, "Oh, well, I would like to try some." I'm like, "Great." So I let her try a bite of rice, and she just went, bleh. I was just like, "It's rice." And ever since then, instead of me taking food to school, I just eat cafeteria food. And that was like, it's so vivid, that memory. I know it's not like, it's my mom's take on sushi, because it stays really well from morning to lunch. And since I was embarrassed, I was like, okay, I don't want to be made fun of. In middle school too. Tough transitional time. But to have that memory also impacted the decision I made in business today. So that was where
That's really cool.
where my school stage and my food experiences in Gallatin. Yeah.
I had a very similar experience. It's funny, I think middle school is the age where it's the most traumatic. Yeah. I don't think I would have had the same experience if it was in high school, but yeah, my family would pack our lunches, and you know, I remember, like you vividly, it was Gangnam it's a Lao style curry that's very green. It's got bamboo and like silkworms and all these very delicious, like things that I think are delicious now. It's one of my favorite things to eat. But at the time, we show up to school with a Tupperware that's not really a Tupperware. It's a used thing. It's a used box of some sort, like a used butter box or anything.
Yep.
You know, and then you open it and people are looking at you with this face, and you're like, okay, maybe I'll just close it and eat later. You know, so much that it scarred me that I asked my parents to just, you know, like, I didn't know what to ask for American food either. I didn't have that experience kind of growing up. I didn't know what American food was. So I just asked them for the stipend, whatever the stipend is, that lets kids eat cafeteria food. I was like, I just want that. I don't want to be made fun of anymore. And then it lasted all the way through high school, so much that I ended up growing up with an eating disorder. I didn't want to eat American food either. What they were serving in the cafeteria was not great. It wasn't delicious, and it was a very hard thing. It's a hard thing to talk about now. When you guys sent these questions, it was like very, it's very triggering to talk about. So, but that was Gangnam was mine.
I can relate to the container thing. That was what came to mind for me, because I grew up eating the cafeteria food, just I think out of like necessity. There was nobody like really cooking in my house, because it was very turbulent. But if I ever did take like a snack or something, my mom was probably putting it in like a plastic bag or something, which she was like, it's a container, like just take it. I was like, absolutely not. I cannot take something. That's not a lunchbox. Like I need a lunchbox and little requirements like that. So I think we looked for a lunchbox at like the flea market or something, and I probably found something that I thought would work, but then it just wasn't sustainable. So it was a lot of cafeteria food and a lot of junk food and a lot of frozen food. When you brought up the question about like our origin stories for food, I was thinking about like how my mom grew up eating, which was so completely different from how I grew up eating, because she talks so much about making tortillas and rice in Mexico. She would get up at like 4 a.m. and basically make tortillas for her 9 siblings, and then they would all like kind of go to work. But she grew up telling me these stories, but not feeding me any of the foods, because, and I realize now that I have my own home, that's why it was maybe such a big deal that my mom always like wanted to own a home, because to me it was like, I don't know, if we rent a house, we can rent a nicer one than like one we can buy. But now I'm like, well, she didn't have anywhere to like have a garden, or like, that's why I think she couldn't like really cook for me. One of the many reasons. But now that like we have a garden, sometimes I'm like, oh, like when you have land, you can compost, you can like grow things you want to eat, you can have people over to share food, you can do all these things that like I didn't grow up doing. I'm like, it's starting to come together, like her growing up on a rancho and me growing up like in the city, like it was just very, very different.
So my experience was quite a bit different than what y'all are describing, because I think Miami's a weird place. Yes, it is the United States. However, it is where you come from. I grew up in a situation where it's like a badge of honor. And it's the capital of Latin America, Latino America. Like, we are all there. So growing up, the foods I ate at home, like I didn't have a peanut butter jelly sandwich until like a year ago. For real. Because at my house it was black beans and rice. That there was always a pot of them in the fridge, and you would just eat that instead of the PB&J. Nothing against PB&Js, they're delicious. But anyway, back to Miami. Growing up there, like I do remember an instance. It was different because, of course, the Latin population is the majority. So I would eat what everybody else was eating. But we did have a boy who transferred into school, and this was middle school, and he was of Arabic descent. I can't remember what country. And his mother packed the dolma, the grape leaves, and he pulled them out at lunch. And I was like, I'll never forget it. Very vivid. I'm sitting over here. He's kind of where Anna is, like catty corner, and I see him pull them out. And one of the boys are so mean. He was like, ew, what is that? Because it was the leaves, and we'd never seen anything like that. Like, we're used to pork and rice and, basics. And he started eating it, and he shared it. And the reaction wasn't what you experienced. Like, it was, this kid happened to like it, but I'll never forget everybody kind of like, you could hear a pin drop. We were like, what is that? So that was where that experience came from, and I always took it with me when I traveled, and moving to Tennessee, coming here and not having any of those comfort foods. There's a Mexican place on every corner. I think on Nolansville I saw there's 24 of them on one strip. But specifically Cuban food, which is Caribbean, it's so different. It has nothing to do with Mexico. Not finding that, I just remember feeling like what that kid must have felt like when I would cook at home for our friends when they would come over when I first moved here, because they're like, ooh, what is this pork? What is this? What plantains? Like, what are all these? Like, I had a friend the other day ask me, how do I pronounce it? Platanos? It's like, yes, you're getting there. What do I put on it? Whatever you'd like. So it was that I could relate to that moment living here, versus in Miami, I never had a moment like that because I was surrounded by my culture, by my community, and my language, like, which is rare in the United States, that you grow up in an environment where the first language isn't English. Everybody spoke Spanish. And my husband, when he goes to Miami, he'll be like, can you talk to my Uber driver? Because still to this day, it's a Spanish-speaking community first and foremost. No matter how much it changes, I think it's always going to retain some of that. But yeah.
That's for the most part true of how I grew up too. Like, I didn't really have, like, if I had brought lunch, it wouldn't have been this hyper foreign thing, because I think the majority in Santa Maria, California is definitely Hispanic. But moving to Nashville is a little different. Now I'm comfortable, but I'm never like the same feeling of at home as I would be in California.
Yeah. I think it's super interesting. Like, where I grew up was here in Nashville, and I remember taking these dishes that my mom always made. And so for me, it was dal and rice. And so dal is just like this lentil soup and rice. And it's like, I think we all came from cultures really where food was so important in the family. And, it's like when my parents moved here, when my grandparents moved here, the way that they preserved their culture was through food, right? And so they would take, seeds and plants, and they'd bring them back from India, sneaking through the customs agents and all that. It's like wrapping them in clothes and all that stuff, putting them in yogurt containers is the big thing in Indian households. And, it's like bringing that here and then planting their own vegetables and growing it. And when I look back upon it, I'm like, we were so lucky to grow up that way. Because it was fresh food made every day for breakfast, lunch, dinner. It's like fresh breads, rice made every day, all that stuff. And both my mom and my grandmother were kind of no leftovers people, because they were just like, hey, everything that we have today, like, you got to eat it and it's done. We're not putting anything in the fridge. It's got to be a clean plate. And I feel like growing up, I kind of took it for granted a little bit, because growing up, I take that dal and rice to school. This kid makes fun of me, and to me, it's actually fascinating that you two had that experience later on in life and not early. And so I kind of felt a little bit more with Colby and Grace on that one. Was I was embarrassed to take that food to school, and I was just like, just let me eat the food at the cafeteria. Like, I'm happy to have the tater tots. I'm happy to have this. And it was more, I feel like, trying to assimilate, because it was hard to find where my identity was. And I feel like I kind of lived 2 lives growing up, and there was like one life, which was the Indian life. And so that's kind of like what we did at home and on the weekends. It was going to temple, it was doing all the Indian festivals, like participating in the dances and like all that kind of stuff. And then there was like living life in America at school, which was a little bit different. And then I think even a third time was like when we would go to India, because we would travel to India to visit my mom's side of the family. We'd go pretty much every other year when I was a kid. And then when we got to India, they were like, oh, the Americans are here. And it's like, it was hard. Everything was hard then, because like we couldn't drink the water there. Everything had to be through, on bottled water. But like, it was also crazy hot. So my mom would bring like Gatorade powders, Tang powders, and just stuff like that me and my sister drank. And so it's like, we'd go there, and then even though we're in India, we're still like, hey, Mom, can I have Gatorade? And she'd bring like mac and cheese, because she knew, for a month and a half, like, this kid's got to have mac and cheese. Just can't eat Indian food every single day. And kind of having that. And so I guess like what I'm curious about is then, did you ever, how did you feel that difference, growing up, and how did that impact how you saw yourself? Maybe for the 3 of us, kind of like younger to, teenage years, and then maybe for y'all a little bit like once you moved here.
Yeah, it was, it made me not want to be who I am, right? It made you not want to be, I didn't want to be Laotian growing up. Yeah, I wanted to be American. And for me, in our high school, it was predominantly white. There were maybe 5 Asian people. 2 of them were Laotian. I was one of them. Yeah. So it was, how do I blend in? How do I look like these kids? How do I act like these kids? How do I eat? The way I learned about American food was mostly just eating what they were eating. You go to the cafeteria line and you see all this stuff, and you're like, I don't know half of it is, but you find some friends and they're eating pizza. So you eat pizza 5 days a week for lunch, and you're like, I don't feel good. Yeah, you don't feel good. And then you're like, you look at the clothes you're wearing. Like, I grew up wearing a lot of Abercrombie and Fitch, because that's what everybody in high school wore, right? So it was like, you grew your bangs out and you listen to pop punk music, and you're like, this is nothing that has to do with me, but it's just like, that's the way I grew up, because it was like, these are just the people I see, right? I didn't see Lao people beyond my family, so I didn't have somebody to help guide me and be like, okay, this is what your culture is. Because for my family, for my mother, they came here at a very hard part in their lives. They were running from war, and it's hard for her to talk about it. I can't get anything out of this woman. I'm like, what's the homeland like? Yeah. What's all these things? And I had to go there and experience it for myself to understand the trauma that she's going through. She hates talking about it. She came here when she was 6 years old, with 8 brothers and 7 sisters and my grandmother. And it was just, they were running for their lives. And for me, in my own, it's like semi-disrespectful when you talk about it. It's like I was running from what they were bringing over, and I was trying so hard to be American. And then as you get older and you start seeing that, people are starting to be accepted for who they are now in America, I think it's so exciting to see, Lao chefs, and to see like Asian writers, or see an Asian superhero in Marvel, right? Yeah. These things are exciting for me now, and I finally feel like I can almost be myself, whatever that means, but I love looking back into my culture now and experiencing these things, and learning about my food and learning about my family, even though they don't tell me much.
I mean, coming here, when I launched Salties, as you say that, it kind of occurred to me that maybe somewhere in my brain, it was my way of staying connected to who I am, where I come from, because I didn't have that community here. I didn't have very many Latin friends here when I moved here. And being so fortunate to grow up in a place where your culture, Latin culture, not specifically Cuban, but just the Latino community as a whole, kind of runs the place. So you grow up with a sense of pride. And while my parents are exiles and they were running from communism and everything that came with that, they're okay to talk about it because everybody talks about it. everybody has a story, and the stories kind of overlap a little bit within the families that came with the different waves of Cuban exiles and refugees that ended up in this country. There's a lot of overlap, and you know somebody who knows somebody who went through, you know, and coming here, I didn't have that, especially during the pandemic, whereas I was used to going home every couple months, because it's an hour and a half flight, not a big deal. I would get my fix. And one of the things that really dawned on me during the pandemic was I was craving mangoes.
Yes.
Right? So I grew up, my grandparents had a mango tree, and I went to school in the South, and that was the first time I really experienced being outside of my bubble, my Miami safe net of, you know, Latino pride. So I get to Gainesville, and my parents warned me of all the things I need to be careful. You have a last name that's Latin. It doesn't matter what you look like you're still an immigrant, all these things, these like list of rules that I had never heard before. So I get there, and there's a Latin place, but it's Gainesville has a lot of South Florida kids, so it's still very meshed. But coming to Nashville was like, that was kind of like the baby step of coming to Nashville, because you're in the South, but you're still like in both worlds. Yeah. Coming here, it's such a different world from anything I'd ever seen before. I fell in love with a boy from here, which is how I ended up here. It wouldn't have just naturally, organically happened for me any other way. And during the pandemic, not having access to that, my grandparents used to send me to college with a plastic bag full of mangoes every time. And I would give them away because I didn't want them. I took them for granted. And then here, like mid-pandemic, I was like, I would kill for a mango off that tree right now. And it's little things like that you don't realize that you're missing. And that's what Salties ended up fulfilling, was my need to reconcile my two worlds, because it does feel like you were saying I live in two, like in Miami I'm the gringa from Nashville, even though I'm totally not. I'm very much who I am still, but that's who I am to them. When we go to Spain, where my family is, I'm the American, you know, and then here I'm the Cuban. So it's, you have this like musical identities that you're playing all the time, and that was, I guess, my way to reconcile it, because when I was designing the menu, I wanted it to be traditionally Cuban, but still had Southern elements to kind of fuse the two together. And that was a lot of the influence in creating all that, was how do I blend these two cultures that are such a big part of who I am.
I resonate a lot with both Kobe and Rita. When you were talking about different cultures, like you have so many different identities. I am very proudly to say I'm a really good hybrid of everything, because I got the Gallatin in Nashville, what's now Nashville, Taiwan, I still value a lot, and my mom's, like, it's just like a mix of different, and I married a country boy too, so it's like all this to find all the similarities and differences that we have together. And I was just thinking about, like, even in middle school, yes, I didn't want to be myself. I didn't want to be Taiwanese. I didn't want to be any different, because I couldn't speak English. Even when I was speaking English, that accent that comes out, people just assume that you don't speak English. So, like, going from, like, a person who loves school to, like, back in Taiwan and moved to Gallatin and was just, like, completely closed up. I didn't really open up until actually right after New York. I felt like New York gave me a voice, and you really have to survive in New York, or you can't move on with your life. So nowadays, and just thinking about the older I get, I was so fortunate, honestly, I was so fortunate to have, my mom kept my grandma's recipe, and then find the local ingredients, what she could do to make exactly the same dish as my grandma. Because my grandma used to, like, ground those sweet rice, ground it herself, but we don't do it here. So she found a substitute, and it also tastes home to me. So my mom has really kept that tradition, the recipe going. I didn't really learn a lot from her, but I'm sharing that with the community now. And so I was really fortunate, even with dumplings. That's what she does. She sent dumplings to college with us. And so the most thing I cook is dumplings in my life, but just having that hybrid identity allows me to see, okay, what would people like here? What would people like there? And what menu item can I draw, not changing the recipe, draw directly from Taiwan, and then place it in Nashville, because I do feel like after understanding of the both worlds really well, and to also tell the story through food. Culture is a big thing for me, and to do it through food even better, because I love to eat, and just the experience everywhere I go, I'm like, what's great there, what's great there. So it's like that hybrid identity is pretty amazing. Now I'm proud to say I wasn't though.
I like that term, hybrid identity. It is.
Yeah.
It absolutely is.
Cool.
I lean into it a lot. Like, we would call ourselves the Spanglish shop at the beginning, and
Yeah, I remember that.
yeah. Well, I have that title pinned for something else now, but we're still, like, I still think of Tantissimo as a Spanglish brand, and I would say I definitely evolved the business from being just pastries to what it is now, because I was using it to like find myself and my connection to my place in Nashville with being Mexican. Like, I was never expecting to be a person who sells food for a living. But then when I started making pastries for Julio's food truck, for Maíz de la Vida, I was exploring like making cakes and things that people were familiar with, but with ingredients that were Latin American, like piloncillo sugar and even abuelita chocolate, which is like the only processed thing I still use, because I'm like, it just tastes like abuelita. I don't know. I can't recreate that. I will try when I have like a ridiculous amount of money to try, but and then people responded well to that, so I felt like I had permission to like keep sharing these different things I grew up with and different pieces of myself that I had like purposely kind of just put aside because they didn't really serve me moving to Nashville. Like, I moved to Nashville in 2012 from California and really struggled to find food that felt like home to me. Not because there's not Mexican food here, because like you said, there is, but in general, like even in California, like I don't go to Mexican restaurants because they don't really taste like a Mexican household.
It's Americanized.
Like ever, across the board. That's true in Nashville, but even more specifically, I think you've spoken about this, like every family has their own flavor, you know? Yeah. So I didn't grow up, not only did I not grow up eating Mexican restaurant food, but we also, like, I did have a really turbulent upbringing, so I pretty much just had, like, what was at my dad's, if that. And we weren't, like, visiting other families, like, that just wasn't really, like, a thing. So now to have, like, just my grandma's enchilada recipe, my dad's birria, like, those two things pretty much can carry my menu, and then the rest of it, like, Josh fills in, but I'm like, they're just that good. But yeah, it's been a real journey. And like I've been really grateful to the Nashville community for liking the food and making me like kind of validating that it is special and it is not weird. And like even when I introduce, like sometimes I'll put like the lengua tacos, like the beef tongue, which is like that was my favorite taco going on.
Mine too.
Yeah, and I'm not like the most adventurous eater on the planet, but beef tongue was just one of those things that when my dad made it, I was like, oh, it's my birthday. And when I put that on, I knew people would like it because by then I had gained enough confidence, but I think my business partner was like, well, we'll see if like the Richland crowd goes for it. I was like, they will. And they really did. They were so excited and I was so grateful. And then we just get to be a lot more creative now. It's great to see how people are like excited to try something new and different now, and they like it's like a superpower now versus a hindrance.
Yeah.
There is an element of fear, I think, as first gen kids cooking ethnic foods for people that you don't know if their palates are going to agree with it. You're coming out here, you're creating art essentially, and you're going, I hope you like it. Yeah. And when they like it, it's such a grind, food especially, of all the industries. Like, there's just all these different variables, and you're constantly juggling 75 different things. And when they like it, it almost like, I remember Saturdays at the farmer's market, you wake up at 5 a.m. to pull this off. This is no joke. The schlepping that we talked about with like the tent, the table, the fryer, the changing the laws so that they work in your favor because of the red tape. And you're doing all this, but there's something about your customers coming back every Saturday going, I'm so glad you're here. Where were you last week? We missed you. And like, we're farmers market girls. Like, that's where we got the start. So the community feeds you in a soul kind of way and keeps you going once you know that they like your food, and then that emboldens you to get really funky with flavors and spices and like, okay, you like that? Hold my drink. Like, you know, let me have some fun with it, you know? So there is that element of fear. I think that first generation chefs, I think anybody who's creating art for anybody goes through fear. But that validation that comes on the back is like, okay, I'm making Abuela proud.
Yeah, I think it's like part of it is, you know, it's like a shout out to the parents a little bit. You know, it's like, I think our parents went through so much to get here. And I think sometimes it's like, you know, I always wonder, I'm like, would I have had the strength to do the same thing that like my parents did? You know, or it's like, I mean, the stories about all of your parents as well and how they came here, whether it was running from a war, whether it was running from communism, whether it was just to build a better life for their families, like the sacrifices that they made were so huge that it's like, I don't even know if I'll get even close to the amount of sacrifice that they did. And I think growing up, I definitely took it for granted a little bit. And I was like, okay, these are just the Indian things that we do. But all these little rituals that we had throughout the week, you know, whether it's like taking off your shoes when you walk into the house, right? Or it's like everybody sits down for dinner at the same time, or, you know, it's like being respectful to your elders. I feel like throughout my like younger years, it's like I just kept doing it. And I didn't really understand why I was doing it, but I was just doing it for the sake of doing it and making sure that the parents were happy. And what I realize now is that they were teaching me so much about our culture every single day. And even though I didn't realize it then, it's like I realize it a lot more now. And I think the fact that, you know, it's like, I think especially for Indian kids growing up, it's like your parents tell you have 3 options for a career. Right? It's like you better be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. I'm sure that's the same for everybody. So like probably when we all went into food, like I remember my dad was like, that's just his hobby. You know, that's not his real job, you know? And it's like, he's like asking all, you know, my friends' dads, you know, who are in medical school, and they're like, oh yeah, he's going to medical school, this. My dad's like, oh yeah, the food thing is just a hobby, you know, he'll end up doing something way better, I'm sure. And, you know, and then I think, you know, it's like we go into this business that we love, and what I have really connected with my parents on, you know, has been that what we do at Taylor and what y'all do in your spaces is it's really passing on the heritage of what we grew up with, right? It's like those memories of having lengua tacos, right? Those memories of black beans and rice, the dumplings, you know, it's like all that food that we grew up with, those are now our memories and what we remember. But it's also what we want to share. And so, you know, it's like one thing that I'm curious about is like, as you were coming up with the concept, what were the decisions that led you to doing the food that you do? Because for me, it's like when I started cooking, I did not want to make Indian food, much like Colby, you know, it's like I wanted to make pizza and burgers and fried chicken. And, you know, it's like, to me, that was the exciting thing at 19 years old, 20 years old that I wanted to make and learn about. And then I think, you know, it's like went through like, okay, cool. Like these are all the cool people who are doing cool things in the world, right? So it's like Ferran Adria's out there in El Bulli. I'm like, I want to make a spherification of an olive, you know, kind of thing. And it's like, you know, Renee Redzepi comes out and starts foraging, and I'm like, I want to go out into Tennessee and start foraging, you know, honeysuckles or whatever it is. And, you know, it's like doing purees and, you know, it's like, and all that kind of stuff. And then, you know, it's like after doing a lot of that and, you know, saying that, hey, this is the best. I remember one day going home and just, my mom had made this extremely simple meal, right? And it was just like a couple of vegetables, a little bit of rice. And while I'm eating it, I'm like, this is the best thing I've ever had. And to me, this tastes like home. And I need to start learning more about this. Because while I can always look to the world and see, you know, hey, this is the big trend that's going on right now. This is the big name chef. This is where all the press is being. I was like, this is who I am. So like, I'm curious to see like how did y'all have that discussion with yourselves, and how did you come to the concept that you launched?
For me, it was really, really easy to come up with my first menu because I did a pop-up. It was my first pop-up that I was going to be making the savory food for. So I had to go from pastry to just like the entire chef right away. So it was like kind of like a write what you know thing. Like I was like, I'm gonna hit up my dad for the birria recipe, and I know exactly what kind of carne asada plate I want to make, something that would feel like home. And I did carne en su jugo, which was like another thing that I grew up eating with my family. So it was like those 3 dishes. And it was seeing the trends, because birria has been really trendy for a while, but I think at that time it was maybe even more popular, especially quesabirria. And when quesabirria first came onto the scene, I was like, not really about it, because I grew up with birria as like a special occasion plate, like a bowl of food that you get at like weddings or birthday, like a 50th birthday. Not like, it's not just always around in a quesadilla. Like you don't just keep it everywhere. So I was really excited to offer a bowl of birria, because most people had heard the word, but what they're getting is nothing like what I grew up on, which was like a weekend food, you know? And I can't wait to like have a space to do bowls of it again. We do have birria tacos right now, and we can put it in a quesadilla because, you know, we caped. But, which was funny, because then I visited my family that year, and they were like accidentally making quesabirria. They were like, yeah, we tried putting birria with cheese, and it was really good. I was like, oh my God. I guess it is a family thing. Like, I guess it's not a wrong thing to do, but yeah. So it was very much like, what do I think is the dishes that people haven't seen?
Yeah.
And that's what I built the menu around. I think still, anytime we want to put something new on, it's like, what am I not seeing? When we had the Henry James kitchen, I could not wait to serve camarones a la diabla.
Yeah.
Because I don't see anybody doing a dish like that. And if I ask for a spicy dish, whether it be like a spicy pasta dish or like outside of like Thai food, it's really hard for me to, even there, sometimes if I have a spicy craving, like I'm not going to get a saucy, spicy bowl of food almost anywhere. It's so hard for me to find that. So I couldn't wait to, I'm always just building the menu around like, what do I want to eat that I don't know where to go get this thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, guava, that's it. Like I woke up one day and was like, I need a guava and cream cheese puff pastry yesterday.
Yeah.
Sick.
And I couldn't get it, and that kind of evolved into like, if you've ever been back home to Miami, they have these little windows, ventanitas, every corner in downtown. Like it's a cultural thing where you show up, you get either your colada or, you know, café con leche and a puff pastry, croquettes or tequeños, which are Venezuelan cheese sticks, pan de bono, Colombian cheese bread. You have all this assortment of international deliciousness paired with your coffee in the morning. And that's how it got started. It was basically this concept of ventanitas. I was like, what do they sell in these windows? Okay, how can I bring that to Tennessee, give it a little southern spin, and ethically source these ingredients? Because the ventanitas in Miami are not getting pasture-raised meat from, you know, your local butcher.
That's right.
Or doing anything from scratch. Whereas, like, I think she and I bonded because when we got started around the same time, we were both like, we're doing everything pasture-raised, compostable, you know, packaging, and everything's by hand. The doughs, the bread, like nothing was pre-bought. You know, I whipped my own cream cheese with orange blossom because I was really like set on doing it this way. But the inspiration came from just like the little windows with the nibbles and coffee in Miami. That's all it was. The only thing I never got around to was getting a coffee machine because back to the schlepping, unless somebody else is going to carry it for me, I'm not setting up a huge coffee machine at the farmer's market. But that's how it started, and then it evolved into Cuban sandwiches, and then the pop-ups that I've done, like, you know, where we got really creative. Like we did a deconstructed Cuban sandwich on nachos for our Women's Day thing, because we were like, how can we do that, make that fun? And then we did like a torta with, was it pork also? It was pan con lechon, but in a torta.
Yeah.
You did the bread.
I did the bread.
Yeah. So it was like we were trying to fuse Mexico and Cuba in a really fun, eclectic way, and like it's just kind of continued to evolve. And you know, then the empanada classes came up, but it all started with guava. It was the root of it.
Yeah.
I think out of everybody here, I don't consider myself a chef at all. My mom is the mastermind. She is the true, I call her home cook.
Yeah.
I was like, instead of yes chef, it's yes home cook.
Might have to steal that one.
Yeah, yes home cook. And like it's mom's cooking, and it just for me, it's like everything she does has been she started cooking when she was 18 years old in Taiwan, and just continue on feeding her 3 kids, feeding her family. Even to this day, when she goes back to Taiwan to visit my grandparents, she's expected to cook in a kitchen. And I was like, oh wow. Yeah, that's a whole different. And so she didn't want that for me, so she never really teach me how to cook. But the idea came from, I was a middle school Chinese teacher here in Nashville, and for Chinese New Year / Lunar New Year every year, we will make dumplings, but not with my mom's fillings. It's like I would like cater the meat filling and buy store-bought dumpling wrappers, and kids just like eat it up. And this is like in Nashville, so I was like, there's something going on. There could be potential here. And then whenever I also travel to China quite a bit with the kids too, every time when they sit down in an authentic Chinese restaurant, it's like, I want dumplings, I want a bowl of white rice. I'm like, there's something going on. So that idea started brewing while I was teaching. And then when I really wanted to start a business centered around dumplings was after New York again. So that's how our menu comes about. And I picked the items that are more acceptable to people in Nashville. So we have dumplings. We also have scallion pancakes. We also have hot and sour soup, cucumber salad. So it's like a dumpling shop in Taiwan. They only do hot and sour soup, dumplings, and side dishes. I'm doing that here. And so, and with my mom's amazing skills and recipes, that I'm able to launch this business and invest and sustain it. So I would say, me personally, I love experimenting. I'm very critical when it comes to things I taste, especially with Asian food, because every time I go back to Taiwan, even in Taiwan, I know which stall to go to for the best of something. So like that part of me, I'm a culture itself already. So to have that and my mom's cooking, to like be super picky about it, and that's how this brand shines through. And of course with the name, if you see my logo, it's like Mama Yang and daughter. When people are like, oh, you're Mama Yang, I'm like, the daughter, do you not see the daughter? So I'm super grateful to have that experience. And when you said we really need to, that resonated with me. We really need to like think about what our parents have gone through to be here and sacrifice for us, and that hit home for me too. Yeah, I got teary again, and my hormones are going. So.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, I started cooking the food that we're doing at Bad Idea now 2 years ago. I was very fortunate to have a restaurant in New York reach out to me. It's where I found my voice about doing a residency program up there. And, you know, when I first started, I was cooking an extension of what I was already doing at Audrey. You know, I was cooking food that I'd learned from all the chefs I worked for with, you know, whatever ingredients I can get my hands on, but it never felt right. It was just, again, it just felt like another job. And the beauty of this residency program was it's an incubator for young chefs to learn who they are and find food that they want to cook. So every day, you know, they would push you to be like, okay, I said, we're making this dish, but this isn't a restaurant. You're here for 3 months. We need to maximize the time that you're here. So what do you want to cook? Not what can you cook, you know, what do you want to cook? And every day they would ask that, and, you know, it started getting to the point where, like, I'm just homesick. I miss my family. You know, the beauty of the pandemic for me was that's when I moved home. You know, and I got to spend time with my family in ways that I've never gotten to do it growing up. You know, that's when they finally opened up to me in ways that I'd never seen before. A lot of people are very hard-headed people. So my mother is a hard-headed woman, but she has a great work ethic, which is where I learned it. And, you know, when I started thinking about missing home, I started missing the food that she cooked. I started missing these flavors, and that's when I started really thinking, okay, well, I want to cook Lao food, but I'm also not fully Lao. Okay, I'm born in America. I've done all these things in my life. I can't lose that side of me either by going to do something very traditional. wouldn't feel right. It would feel like I was cooking somebody else's food. I'd be cooking my family's food, just like I don't want to cook the food of the chefs I've worked for. So it became how do I find my own voice? And I had to do a lot of research, and I had to like start cooking these original dishes and like feeling them and understanding, okay, well, if I were to make this dish again, what would it feel like? What would it look like? And fortunately for Bad Idea, that's what we do now. It's we start with the main idea of what this dish is, and when you eat it, for me, when I close my eyes, it feels like I'm eating the original dish. But when you open your eyes and you look at it, it feels like something I've made, and it's so fun because now I'm, in a way, creating my own voice, creating my own style of food. I'm creating a new style of food that is first generation. And I like to think of it the way that my family cooked, because when they came over from Laos, they didn't have access to the ingredients that they would in Laos, so they had to recreate these dishes here in America. So like Geng No Mai here in America has squash in it, pumpkin in it, but in Laos there's no squash or pumpkin. So they never would have put that in there. And it's so funny to see it, like going back to Laos, eating this dish and being like, that doesn't taste or look like anything I've ever had in the 31 years that I've been alive. But that's the original dish. But you close your eyes and you eat the version my mom makes, you eat the version that I had in Laos, they have the same feeling. And that's what I'm trying to strive to do now for my food, is to have the same feeling and emotion when you eat it, but it is me in a way.
Is there a particular dish at Bad Idea that you feel like encapsulates this concept for you?
Yeah, there's two dishes. There's the scallop crepe, which is
really good.
it's it's
and
funny.
The spicy one.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a dish that's built around a lot of my memories growing up. It's funny. It's built on French technique, which is a lot of the technique I grew up learning, but it's built on the flavors of this very specific jiao, which is a condiment in Laos. It's got acid and heat and salt and spice and umami and everything, but it's also built on a Chinese dish that we would go down. My family would drive to Atlanta a lot because at the time it was the only city that you could go get Asian food, right? But you couldn't get Lao food either. But we would always drive to Atlanta, eat at this dim sum restaurant, and my favorite dish was chang pun, which is a rice paper roll. So that's where this dish looked like chang pun. We take a crepe, we wrap it in mousseline, and then we serve it with this sauce that's got all these flavors that remind me of like the dishes I would eat growing up. And then the other dish is it's a durian milfui, which is that was me pushing the boundaries, being like, I don't know who's gonna like this. Because
You've got to like durian.
you've got to like durian,
Which is awesome.
And it's funny. I went to Thailand, I went to Laos, and it's something that like divides this country, both countries. There are signs that say like everywhere, like, do not bring durian into this business. Like, do not bring it on the train. You'll be arrested. Like all these things, and it's like, okay, well, and I didn't start liking it until maybe 3 years ago, only because like my mother hates it, and I just thought that I wouldn't like it either. So she never brought it around. She'd always kind of talk bad about it, and then one day I was like, I'm gonna try this because I need to feel closer to, my family, and I need to understand what this is. And I loved it, so I knew I had to put it on the menu. But it was just I put it on the menu thinking it would be on the menu for one day. Now it's something. It's our number one like dessert. People will probably get upset if I take it off.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes, we will.
So good.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So like, I'm very interested to find out what everybody's perspective is when it comes to bringing, like when you have your heritage and you made it a little bit more of your identity, like the creative side. So where is the balance when it comes to that? Like, how do you tell that story? Like, yes, it is together, but like, where is the boundary, the balance of mixing the two identities together, and what gets more of that flavor, and which side gets more of that flavor? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll take that one. So, to me, it's like the way that I've studied it is that there are. What I would say is there's immigrant cuisine, there's fusion cuisine, and then I think what is first generation American.
Okay.
So the way that I define immigrant food is it is people who came from another country, came to America to open a business, and their main goal was to make money.
Okay.
Right? It wasn't so much so to showcase the cuisine that they grew up with, because they were going to make that at home, but they wanted to find something that would make money. So their inherent assumption is that Americans will not eat the food that we had at home. Right, so I'll speak for just Indian culture, right? Like, they're making chicken tikka masala, naan bread, right? Like, chicken tikka masala is a British dish, naan bread is Persian, right? But they wanted to make it cheap. They wanted to put it out on a buffet. You know, they basically make two sauces, and out of two sauces, you can have a million dishes. And you know, and they all kind of like, you know, just copied each other. You know, it's the same restaurant. The neighborhood Indian restaurant's kind of the same restaurant everywhere you go. Then I think you had fusion cooking, where the inherent assumption is still Americans cannot eat the food that we have at home. But the difference was that in fusion, they said, let's take dishes that are recognizable to Americans and then add some Indian flavors on top of that. Right? So I'd be like, here's our chicken tikka pizza. Right? Here's our chicken tikka poutine. Right? Here's like fries with keema on it, you know, or like here's our lamb burger or whatever. And so it's food that is recognizable, but they're trying to introduce flavors that would be Indian.
Okay.
Then I think there's first generation American cuisine, where I think our inherent assumption is that we want to share this food and other people also want to try it. Because to me, I grew up, you know, having mostly Indian food, and we weren't exposed to that much here. You know, it's like I had Indian food, American food, you know, Southern, you know, fried fish, you know, a little bit of barbecue, some Italian food. But now it's like the world is just a little bit of a different place, where it's like, I want to go have Laotian food on a Tuesday, or I want to have Cuban food on Friday, and I want to have Vietnamese food on Saturday, or whatever it is. And I want to explore and eat the things that I've never had before. And so for me, when we started doing first generation food, it was a blend of the food we grew up with, as well as the place that we grew up in. So for me, I feel like at Taylor, we do certain dishes are literally from home. And that's the one thing, like, I hear a lot, like, in our discussion, it's like, what feels like home, and what comes from home, and what comes from the family. So dishes that we do, like dar bhat, kari bhat, those are staples in our house. Like, they are eaten every single day. And so we wanted to share those dishes, but we want to share them the way that they're served at home, right? So that way, if you ever got the chance to go to Gujarat and have dar bhat or kari bhat, it would taste pretty close to what you got here, right? And then I think there's the other part of it, which is the place that we grew up, right? So from here, we have all these influences that come to us. But it's like, we did a dish on our opening menu at Taylor, which was pork kopa. And so in India, there's only pork in really two states, which is Goa and Kerala, because they were colonized by Catholics and the Portuguese, and not Hindu or Muslim. So there's beef dishes there, there's pork dishes there. And there's a pork dish where the main seasoning is like fennel seed, coriander seed, red chilies, garlic, and vinegar. So what we did was we kind of took that spice rub and put it on this pork kopa, and then we grilled it. And then we served it with a salad that's made with all those ingredients if you planted them. You know, so it's like cilantro, apples, dried red chili, fennel salad. And so if you're from the South, you can look at this and be like, you know what, that's not too different from barbecue. And this is something I can relate to, because it's a pork shoulder with a spice rubbed, served with slaw, right? And to an Indian person, if they're from Goa or Kerala, they can eat that and be like, you know what? Those are the exact flavors that we would season pork with if we were in India. And so that way there's this relatability between both cuisines that also makes sense.
I have an answer for that too, because I think about this a lot. And I like what you said about how something tastes versus how it looks, because I was thinking about that same thing. Like, what if my grandma like was alive and she came to taste like the enchilada that's based on her recipe, like, would she recognize it? You know? And I was thinking, like, if she looked at it, she'd be like, why is it a small plate, for one?
It's not enough food.
Yeah. Like, why is there just one?
You're starving people.
And then, but if she tasted it, I think she'd be like, okay, like, good job, Miha. Like, probably still thinking that hers is better, but,
of course.
and you know, that's how it should feel to whoever's cooking the thing. They should think their thing is the best. But, Yeah, so I think as long as like I think that I recognize how it feels to eat that food, then how it looks and how it fits into the business, like you have more room to play with that. The one part where it's an ongoing discussion is spice. So because your tolerance changes too, and some customers love spicy, and some dishes are supposed to be spicy, but you can go overboard, and if you do, then you can't enjoy the food. So that's an interesting thing, because I have to, like, we have a couple of sauces on our food truck that are like supposed to be spicy, and every once in a while the like chili peppers like don't even come in hot enough. So then suddenly you find yourself, you're able to put it on everything, and it's like, oh, there's nothing wrong, it still tastes delicious. But then I have to be like, hey, that thing's not spicy enough. Like a week will pass before I even realize like we actually have to kick that up. Or sometimes it'll be like, why is the poblano salsa like too spicy? Like, now we got to bring it back. And it's like, it's just like any other chefing. You have to taste all the time and think about everything all at once. It's a lot, but it's worth it. Yeah. I think every dish that goes on, there's that inner battle of like, is this authentic and is it us?
Yeah. I think there's always that fork in the road, right? It's like, do you have to wash it down?
I think the amount of permission that you get to play comes down a lot to your service model too. Like if you're in a position where you have servers, like it's on them a lot to communicate and set expectations, and at farmers markets it's on us, because even with something like spice or an ingredient that the person might not recognize, you can really like create someone's experience to make sure that they're going to enjoy that thing. And if they would have just tasted it without you telling them like why you love it, they might not enjoy it. But if you are able to sell it well and set expectations well, they might have the best meal of their life.
Yeah.
I think that part has been huge in developing our brand, and it's going to be a huge part of the restaurant, because we do want to do things like it's in our business model. Like other places might sell food that they think Americans want to eat. That's not the point of us being in business, because there doesn't need to be another Mexican restaurant. There needs to be more of like the sharing of culture and stories, and even I like to even bring things that my parents didn't grow up eating or they did grow up eating, but they haven't had access to since they left Mexico. Like now I'm in a position where I can order like specialty ingredients that they haven't seen since they lived there. And so I'm doing things that they no longer do at home, but it's a superpower. I think you just have to own it and make sure your customer gets sold on it, I guess.
You're so right about the power of telling someone this is the experience that you're
About
allowed to have this experience. Like let me shepherd you through what's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because it does then give people permission to enjoy it, because they feel like they've already been given a map. It's so true. Yeah.
I think good service makes food taste better 100%.
Yeah.
You've got the whole spiel down.
Every day?
Yeah.
Lots of feels.
The stories, they make a difference.
Yeah,
I think the first generation chef portion of this also, like the first two that you explained, there's a matter of survival. You need to sell to make money, because you have to, like, we don't really speak the language, we don't have a degree necessarily in the traditional form, but what can we do? We can make food, and people are always going to want to eat. So that's the first level. The next level is, okay, we're going to fusion, but like it has to stick to a certain model. Like there's a very specific roadmap there to, but with first gen, I think we've grown up with all these flavors. It's not a survival thing. It's not let's stick to this model because again, money's the goal. It's, okay, we've grown up with everything. How do we make our food, our home culture, and mesh it with this external melting pot of a culture that we've all grown up around? So like, I use ingredients like miso, not remotely Latin or Cuban or Caribbean. However, I love miso.
Yeah.
So like, I'll incorporate it into like a plantain soup. It goes really yummy. It gives it another layer. With empanadas, like Cubans do a spinach and cheese empanada, which is lovely. But moving here, I was like, what can I do to give the South a little, hey guys. So instead of spinach, we use collards, which are the unsung hero of the leaf world. Changed my mind. but it holds up, it gives it flavor, and people in the South know collards. So they're naturally gravitating towards it, and they're going to try something different but still familiar. And I've not sacrificed really the recipe because it's still creamy. It's that bechamel base with the cheeses, but you're still using regional, local ingredients that are fresh to you. I do a hot-ish arroz con pollo. Arroz con pollo is rice and chicken, super traditional Cuban meal. But I'm in Nashville, and hot chicken's a thing, Lord. So I was like, all right, how can I make this empanada filling work for me with an element of Nashville's heart and soul in it? And the collards and the hot chicken sell really well because of where I am. So you can tote that line, but that first gen also gives us permission to play with ingredients from other cultures that you can bring into yours because you grew up with them. So it is part of your identity as well. It's kind of cool. It is a superpower.
My grandma also didn't have to feed any vegans. So that's
vegans and vegetarians. Yeah, you gotta,
That's where I'm like, okay, I have total free reign here because this is uncharted territory.
Yeah.
There's no family
It's a brave new world here
for vegans at all.
That may very well be the title of this article. My grandma didn't have to feed any vegans.
Oh my God.
We had somebody with an allium allergy come into the restaurant yesterday, and I felt so bad for them.
I can't imagine.
That one's a tough one.
There's no dish
What
that
allergy?
I make that does not have an allium with onion or garlic.
Yeah.
Because it's so ingrained in my family's food, in my culture's food. There's garlic, there's onion in everything.
Yeah.
You guys sell wine?
And it's like I'm so sorry. There's not much you can eat here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have that. We have nightshade allergies.
Yeah.
And it's like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and I'm like, everything.
Wrong restaurant.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything. I think what's like so great about this is like, I think all of you are so like incredible in the things that you've done, and the food that you're bringing. Because I think what I would love for like the general public to understand is like how hard it is to do this. In the face of what I feel is sometimes adversity from even family members, right? Like for me, I remember the first day it opened, my dad has 3 sisters, they all came to the opening night, and they looked at the menu and they were like, why are you serving this? And they were like, this is the food that we have at home. Why would you ever serve that to people? And for them, they didn't value they value the food at home, but they didn't value it as a business concept. They're like, no, you have to make it milder. You have to take these shortcuts. Like, you need to make it a business. So like, don't buy that like expensive spice. Like, go buy the cheap stuff, And it's like, if you keep your food costs low and all this stuff, and then schlep it out, you'll make more money doing that. And I was like, that's not the reason for opening. Like, of course, like as a business, we want it to succeed, but we also believe that if we do things the way that we believe is right, that then people will also come and support that, right? And I remember that first night, we went out with this dish called dokla, which is a little steam bread. And it's a dish you won't find any restaurant, in pretty much in the world, because it's a dish that's just made at home. And my 3 aunts are just like sitting there, like staring at everybody, like, like, what are they eating? How are they eating it? They're like, what's going on? And they start seeing people eating this food and then smiling and loving it and shaking their heads, right? And they started going around to the tables like, do you like this? Like, just no shame, auntie, just questions start coming out. And at the end of it, they started realizing, they're like, oh my God, like now we start to see what you're doing, right? And you're taking these family recipes and sharing them with the world. And it's like, when you think about the cultures that we come from, they are vast and large. And there's so many people in the world that have never tried these things before, right? And so the fact that then we're like, hey, it's like we're kind of taking that step out to be like, yes, I know this is the food, like the immigrant fusion food is what you've always seen and that's what you know. But now to understand the food that we make in homes and the cuisine that is being created right now, like that is to me the very exciting part about American and first generation cooking, is that it's really, people are starting to try how many people have had durian before they have this durian millefeuille that Colby's making, right? I remember like the first time when Bobby came and did that pop-up with you and you had that gang sum, and I was like, man, this is so cool. But also it's like the new stuff, like when you're doing that, the Lao bologna, that you're making, like I was like, this thing is delicious, but it's a product of being Lao, and also like growing up here where bologna sandwiches are just it's a thing, it's like you go out to Robert's, on any given weekend and grab one.
Special.
And like that's really where I think it's so exciting, and it's exciting to me, is that we're all able to like come together, and I think as we keep growing in the cuisine, we find those things that are more similar than they are different, and so I think it's such a special thing. And like what I'm curious to know is, now that as we kind of start, this discussion, what do you feel the challenges that you face, in presenting the food the way that you want to? And is there a way that like we can come and help support that, or support you in making those decisions, or helping talk through some of those issues?
For me, it was finding people that could help me work. I had this one guy who worked for me, who was phenomenal, but then he moved to New York, alas.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I
moved back.
I kept running into a wall where basically I ended up taking it all on myself, because for me, I'm representing not just my family, but my culture as a whole, in a community where it's very underrepresented, and I can't afford to have somebody undercook beans or undercook rice, which was happening because for some people it's just a paycheck. Like they're coming in, they're collecting their money, they're cooking the thing and going home, versus for me it's heart, soul, it's very intimate, it's very personal. So finding help that cared about the food, and it wasn't for lack of effort. Like you try to bring people in and tell them the stories and but at the end of the day, some people just are there to do a job and that's it. And I think with food, at least where I'm coming from and where I'm at with it is, if you don't care about telling the story and care to hold it to the highest standard of perfection, as close as we can possibly get to it, then I'd rather do it all alone, even if I explode, because I don't want anybody misrepresenting the food or the culture, ultimately. That's been the biggest part, I think, is finding the help to get it out, because it's when you're doing anything from scratch, y'all know it's, Lord, if I could be an octopus.
It's funny you say that. I mean, it's so hard cooking your food, because this isn't something that exists here. So when you hire people, it is for them just a paycheck. They don't have the understanding that you have. They don't have the same care that you have. And I think one of my most difficult moments at Bad Idea was somebody undercooking the rice. And it's something that's so simple to me, right? We're an Asian restaurant. We should always have perfectly cooked rice. Why would we serve anything less? It's rice. But to somebody else, it's rice.
Right.
It's just rice, right? But no, this is a staple. My cuisine is based off of rice. So if you mess that up, then
the whole thing is
everything's done.
Domino effect.
Yeah, everything's done. Why would you care about anything else? And it's hard to find people, Lao people, that want to cook Lao food. That's what I'm looking for now. I want to be a voice for people in my family and Murfreesboro and other cities and in other Lao communities, of just being like, I know our families moved here and they opened restaurants. They opened Thai restaurants, and everybody's running from cooking now, but this is something you can do, and it's viable. You can cook your food and be proud of it. And if we can find more Lao people to cook food, that'd be the coolest thing.
Yeah, it's a similar struggle. For me, I actually don't do that much of the prep anymore. I'm sure I'll go back to the drawing board when we do open our restaurant, but I find that when I'm quality controlling, it's very challenging, because you'll either have somebody who understands Mexican flavors, but they don't understand specific techniques we want, like how the perfect cut on cilantro. Like, it's not like at home where you can just hack it. It has to be like perfect. It has to last a long time and not be bruised in any way, because those are our quality standards of fine dining. But then if you bring a fine dining chef in, they might think that they know Mexican food, but they're not familiar with the flavors that I'm trying to present. Some of the hires we've had have had that issue. Even my partner Josh, like I sometimes have to say, like, as delicious as this thing is that you made, unfortunately it doesn't really taste right. And like that's the worst thing to have to, the worst news to have to break to him, because I might think like it's delicious, we should put it on this other thing, but it can't be like the salsa for the enchilada because it's just not right for whatever reason. We had this issue with refried beans this week where I had them and I was like, let's take them off because I just didn't feel like they were right. And then he made them and I saw what I thought was like what was happening, what was wrong, which would, like, you could never explain to someone because they were delicious, but I'm like, they're a little smoky, they're not spicy enough. Like, I sound like I'm just like, you know, crapping on you, but like they're just not right. So I'm like telling like a chef who's more experienced than I am that the product's not like correct to me. It feels like an ego thing, but I'm like, the whole point of this brand is to share this food that I don't see other places. Because I had walked in once where like someone took it upon themselves to puree the beans in a blender, which is like my absolute, like, this can never happen. It's my worst thing I see in Mexican restaurants is beans with no texture. For one, it just tells me what I can expect for the rest of the meal. And there's a reason why beans are supposed to be mashed by hand. It's the same reason behind the mortar and pestle, because the flavors incorporate in a whole different way. And yeah, saying things like that, it's like, it seems like a small thing, but it's not. It's like the reason you don't see hand smashed beans in most Mexican restaurants is because they are difficult. Those are things you normally only see in the home. Same way with our enchilada is fried. Every single one is fried to order. It's not practical. That's why there's only one on the plate. And I tried doing it. It's like a insane thing to try to do in a restaurant setting, but if it's going to work, it's going to work one at a time. And I'm like, but that's another one that's really, really, really difficult to teach, because you might think you have it, but you literally have to eat it like almost every day to make sure like it's crispy but not too crunchy where the edges of the tortilla rip, and it's not too soggy where like there's no more crunch to it. It's like it has to be perfect every time, because there's only one on the plate, and grandma would come back from the dead and say something about it if it was wrong, you know.
She would.
It's very challenging to uphold those standards that are really, they only exist in your head because there's not a reference for what that should taste like. So you have to teach somebody like over and over and over and over until they know the food as well as you know it. And that's a tall order.
And then they moved to New York.
Exactly.
Maybe that's the title
That's
of this article.
I would say I would have two, on top of my two challenges. First one, you know, it's a mom and daughter business. We butt heads like crazy. Like crazy.
Can't imagine
especially at the beginning. And nowadays it's more of, because she's so passionate about the food she makes. She's like, what about we introduce this dish? I'm like, okay, Mom, when you introduce one dish, if it's really good and people loves it, okay, now can you make 80 of those?
Yeah.
Which is the same concept like one empanada. Like, I'm like, can you do that? She's like, you know, so there's always like the communication part and butting heads. But ultimately, I like, for her, I like for her to think of a big picture of like, okay, if your food is so good, like, what, people loves it, what do you do? I can't do that, you know. And so we started to do seasonal limited items.
Right.
Yeah, so which is great. So we have solutions. Another one is when you were talking about immigrant, like the 3 stages, us as a first gen, like, how do I open people's mind in Nashville of, this is not what all Chinese food is about. It's not about General Tso's chicken. That invented because of survival, right? They need that survival. The Chinese restaurant needs that money, needs to have a different flavor. How do I open people's mind to let them see that Chinese food is not just about that? It's much more. Like, if you want to connect to other part of the world, it is it's not about hot and sour soup, it's not about wonton soup. Like things like that, we get people who wants to order from us and just ask if we have General Tso chicken. And our answer has always been, we're dumpling based. We're a dumpling based restaurant, which is true. But at the same time, like, there are still people here that still haven't tasted that flavor because they're so used to what the immigrant owned, the fusion restaurant. They're so used to that, and that's their idea of what Chinese food is. So like, how do I show them little by little that this is what the potentially what you could also try too. So the education part, and this another reason why I do dumpling classes too, is to also like talk about how my mom makes the food, how the techniques comes about, and how difficult it is, how time consuming, labor intensive it is to just make one little dumpling.
Yeah.
I have a platform to share because of dumpling classes, and I want to continue to share that story and help people understand that the world is a lot bigger than just what you know right now. Yeah.
I think it's good. I think like what everybody's doing, it's like even with all the struggles that we have, right? Whether it's finding the right help, whether it's making the right decision on like, you know, how spicy to make a dish, is that, you know, on the one hand, I feel like we're learning about our own cultures and learning about our own selves the more we do these things, you know? And like for me, I didn't know how to cook a lot of these Gujarati dishes, but the fact that then I'm able to connect with my mom and like learn how to make them and then to share them is important. But it's also the act of making them, like especially like when I grind spices in a mortar and pestle, like I feel like my grandmother is like right next to me, you know, and like, and that's right, yeah.
Right over your
and she also told, you know, my grandma tidbit is like, she was always like, you can make, she's like, I'll give you any recipe you want, you'll still never make it as good as me.
Yeah.
You know, she's like, and I was like, why is that? She's like, I've been making it for 60 years, you've made it once.
That's
like, you know,
good, whatever recipe you can have it.
Good luck.
And they don't have recipes usually.
Yeah, and they have,
It's a little bit of this, a pinch of that.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, it's like, but just that act allows us to keep learning as well, and I think that's a fun part about it. And then on the other side, it's like, even though we go through all the struggles of schlepping and moving things around and doing all that, at the end of the day too, it's making an impact on so many people's lives. Because I think what we haven't touched on is that there's a second generation, right? Which is like, you know, kids that are young right now and growing up, and because of the foods that everybody's making, they're so much more exposed to the foods of the world than we ever were. You know, and like you'll have kids now in schools who like, it's totally normal. Like they will know what pho is. You know, they'll know what ramen is. They'll know what quesadilla is. They'll know what sushi is, right? And to them, like now it's like, oh, like that's a cool thing to bring to school now because of that. And I think like sometimes like I forget about that part. You know, it's like, even though it's like hard in the moment and what we're doing is like tough, and it's like, you know, sometimes like we'll get feedback on a dish and everybody's like, it's too spicy, it's too spicy, it's too spicy, it's too, and I'm like, I know it is, but it has to be. And we'll give you a little bit of yogurt, we'll give you some extra rice, we'll, you know, like have a beer or something like that, you know, just to kind of chill. But it's like, it has to be that way. And knowing that eventually I think it will make a difference in people's lives and how they're going to eat is really a motivating factor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I didn't want to cut you off. It just I thought that was maybe the and we're done look.
Yeah, unless anybody has anything to say kind of at the end, or
I got a question.
Or a question, yeah.
I got a question. You know, you guys are all obviously doing your own things with your own food. Have you ever encountered a situation where, you know, somebody who's not from this culture likes to tell you that you're doing it wrong and you should be doing it
All the time.
Yes.
Sorry, I need this one.
Yeah.
Cuban food is not spicy. We're talking about spice.
Yeah.
We don't do spice. We are spice adverse.
Yeah.
What we do is we get our spice from the copious amounts of garlic that we put in our food. So if a recipe calls, my husband learned this about me when I moved here. I was cooking for him. He's like, I swear, if I see a recipe calls for a clove, you're throwing in a bulb. And I'm like, absolutely. Why would you not do that? I got a review once from a woman who admitted, she's like, I've never tried Cuban food before. I was really excited to come and try the salty cubana, but I was so disappointed because it wasn't spicy. It's like, okay, so you've never had it before. Admittedly, you have no idea what you're coming in for, and you're upset because it wasn't spicy. But Cuban food is not spicy, and yet you're reviewing me based off of that factor, which doesn't even play into the scheme here. Like citrus, we use tons of that, lots of garlic, lots of onions, pork, it's got to be juicy. Like there's so many other factors you could rate Cuban food. Heat is not one of them, and you are telling me, who is of this culture, that I'm doing it wrong because it has no heat. Took a long time to craft a response to that one on the reviews. Like, because, thank you for coming, but also you don't know what you're talking about.
No.
Yeah, I had someone, it was all the bizarre comments I've gotten have been on Instagram DMs always. But one of them, one of them was some guy who just was telling me that birria is traditionally sheep and that what I'm making is not birria. And I was like, first of all, what you're thinking of is goat. That's the original birria.
Just to start.
But secondly, it's very common for it to be made with beef, especially in the States, because
beef is
you
king.
don't just have a goat in the backyard anymore. So this is the food I grew up on. It's 100% authentic. I'm Mexican. You're not. Thanks for man and white explaining this. It was just on every level wrong. I've also had someone correct me on the meaning of the name of my business, saying that tantísimo means dumb because they're thinking of the word tonto, not the word tanto.
Two different words.
The irony is just loaded on that one.
Wow.
It's layered on there.
Those are the ones I can think of. Luckily, it hasn't been that much because the farmers markets crowd is awesome.
They're great, yeah.
I think that maybe once we open a restaurant and hopefully are graced with, press and outside opinions, then there will be good and bad ones and more people that don't really know what they're coming in for. It's probably part of the deal, but
yeah, this review came from a pop-up I did at a restaurant at Chopper. Mais was out and they tapped me. I was very flattered, and that is where this came from. The farmers markets, like we talked about, you have that face-to-face interaction, and you kind of get to baby your people a little bit and kind of tell them, hey, this is what you're ordering, just so you know it's this, it's that, expect. When you're in a restaurant setting, you're in the kitchen slinging dishes. You can't have that face-to-face. You have figured out the model, because here you do the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
But if you're behind the kitchen at a bar, you're just moving, grooving, getting the food out. So that's where that came from. I wish I would have had time to explain to this woman what to expect off the bat, but it's a luxury you don't always have.
do you deal with that a lot?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, it's funny you say what you were saying earlier is I love it when a white person tells me I'm being unauthentic, because you don't know what authenticity means to me.
Right.
It may not be the dish that my family makes per se. There's nothing unauthentic about it. This is the food that I'm cooking. This is what feels real to me. And the dish that gets the most criticism is our lob salad. So in Laos, in Thailand, lob is typically made with meat, and it's a meat salad. For me, it was typically always raw. For me, when I wanted to put this on the menu at Bad Idea, everything on the menu is so meat heavy because that's how Thai and Lao people eat. There's not this wide diaspora of vegetables everywhere. So every dish has meat in some point. So I wanted to have a dish that was a salad. It only made sense that the lob salad would become something that is just based on the abundance of vegetables that we can get here. And this person left a review saying, your larb, which is the most improper way to say this. Larb is, when you go to Thailand and Laos, you ask for larb and no one knows what you're talking about. It's lob, and it's only ever been lob. And when he said it was the larb here is so unauthentic. It didn't have the spiciness and the freshness that I had at this restaurant. I'm like, well, that's that restaurant. Bad Idea is this restaurant, and this is the flavor that makes sense here. We keen in on the bitter side of it. We keen in on, the toasted rice powder. It's not meant to to have all this heat and acid, because then if you add all of that, you take away from the beauty of all the vegetables that I've spent so much time sourcing.
Right. I think people forget that cooking, I believe, is a creative discipline. We are all allowed to take, and first gen chefs really do lean in hard on this, where we are able to be liberally creative with our dishes. And people forget that, and they show up thinking, well, I'm going to get, somebody was like, your empanadas are not authentic because you use lamb and beef in your picadillo. And I'm like, and you're upset because it's delicious?
Yeah.
Like, what's the issue? Sorry. But they're not authentic because, you do it that way. And it's like, well, that's my creative interpretation on this dish. I'm not sacrificing its essence. I'm just adding to it. And there's a lot of, I think, people who don't cook or have never been in the service industry or just in general are not creatives, don't understand, like, we don't have to stick to a book necessarily. Like, we're allowed to have some fun with it. That's part of the beauty of what we do.
I think also so many people forget that you should only review the thing in front of you. You should only respond to the thing in front of you. Like, assume that the person who has given this to you had reasons for giving it to you this way, and then engage with what you're eating, not with what you're not eating.
Right.
Like, why doesn't it have this, this, and this? Well, okay, maybe the better question is, why does it have this, this, and this? And let me think about what might be the reasons for that, and what am I experiencing because of this? And reviewing the fiction or the imaginary is not a useful way of living your life.
Based on your perceived expertise of a foreign culture that you know nothing about.
Yeah. Just experience what's in front of you and assume that it's being given to you for a reason.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And it was made with a lot of love.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got a review maybe a couple months ago about how this is European Indian food.
Here we go.
And it's like, to me, it's like we're literally making the dishes that are from Gujarat, like dishes that come from home. And like, I think the one of the hardest parts of this cuisine is, I feel like sometimes we get hit from both sides, right? So Indian people might look at Taylor and they're like, you know what? There's no reason for us to go here because we can just make these dishes at home, right? And why should we pay this amount of money to just have something that's just so basic, in our homes? On the other side, you might have people who have an expectation of what Indian food is, and they might look at it and say, like, oh, there's no butter chicken on here. Like, I don't, that's what I eat in Indian restaurants, and I don't want to try it. And I think like that's kind of where I've always struggled the most, because it's like, while it is, an Indian style dinner party that's a prefix menu, it's like, to a lot of people, they want Indian food to be really cheap. And they want it to be a $15 buffet, all you can eat kind of situation. And, what we're also trying to push is that Indian food is one of the technically most complex foods you can make. And I feel that way about really everybody's cuisine. Like, there's so many ingredients that go into it. There's so many steps. There's so much layers. Hours and layers that go into it. Like, when we make biryani over here, it takes us 4 days, just to get everything ready to make that. And, it's like 4 days of labor, $15. Just doesn't compute, like you can't make that math, the math doesn't work. And for us, it's like, I feel like we do want to do everything the right way. It's like we're blending, like we get all the spices whole, we're grinding them in a mortar and pestle, we're doing those things right. Like, we're chopping all the vegetables fresh, even here, we don't even buy peeled garlic, it's like we peel it all ourselves. And, it's like just little things like that, which are the basis of all of our foods, is so labor intensive, that it's like, we need to showcase what that is. And there's going to be, I think, a lot of people that don't understand it. But at the same time, I think there's also so many people who are open to trying it, and I love it when there's guests that come in and they're like, the dal, which, we had 4 to 5 nights a week at our house, they eat it and they're like, you know what? I can eat this every single day. And then when we have other dishes like that they're like, I can't believe I've never had this before. And what if those were people's first impressions of Indian food? What if it wasn't this buffet line and the butter chicken and things like that? But now for that second generation that's coming in, maybe it is. It's like, we've even had some kids that have come in here, and they might be 8, 9, 10 years old and just kind of growing up and learning about food, and they're trying this for the first time. And they're like, you know what? I really like this. And this is something that I could see myself eating. And it's just sharing that story, I think, more and more and more
and explaining to people like all the layers that go into it. We didn't just buy this half made and then put it together and zapped it and presented it to you as a meal. Like before we launched, it took me forever because in the way that you feel crazy because you're like, I'm technically not a chef, like, but I know what I'm looking for. And I wanted our empanada dough to be a certain thickness and I wanted certain layers, and I'm not classically trained. I didn't go to school for this. So it was the school of hard knocks, me in my kitchen, just like hitting a rock over and over again until I finally got the recipe down. And that took like months. And then people look and they're like, well, you're charging so much for an empanada. And I'm like, you have no idea what goes into just even not just sourcing the ingredients to your point and doing it the right way, but like taking the time to like make the dough from scratch, do the book fold, run it through. Like it takes a lot of manpower, man hours to woman hours, to in this case, to make that happen. And all you're getting is a flash fried, delicious pocket of heaven. But there's so much that like went into this, and the thoughtfulness behind like how many times we made that dough before I was like, that's it. This is what we're rolling with, because that's what I was looking for. Like, I think there's the education portion, to your point, Grace, is huge. Is telling people like, I know what you're used to, but this is how I grew up. And when you and I were cooking, I remember when we started making the dishes here, you were like, oh wait, you cook down these? Well, this is what I cook down in oil, and this is how we start our bases. And it was so different because Cuba and India on opposite ends of the globe. But to your point, we have so much more alike, we realized, than we are separate, you know? The ingredients, the techniques, a lot of it, like it blends together at some point a little bit. So
and I think like there's also so much like haters always going to exist. You know, it's like the haters are always there. But I think like, you know, the
I've
fact
heard they're
that
always going to hate.
and the player's going to play. You know, and like I think the more that, you know, we're able to have these conversations and talk to each other and support each other in through those things, it not only I think helps us be determined in what we're doing, but it also, like, I hope it inspires like that next entrepreneur or that next food creative that's going to be like, you know what, like they didn't hold back, and so now I don't have to either.
Right.
Because I think like what we always faced was like, okay, every place that we might have looked up to or place that we saw in the marketplace, they just weren't doing the way that we wanted it or it felt like home. Right. There was always just something that was a little bit off about it. It didn't feel right. Right. And so we went out and said, you know what, like we're going to make it the way that we feel it should be made. And hopefully that also inspires that next crop.
Right.
You know, to be like, hey, like I see what's going on over there. And you know what, like I've always wanted to make my food this way. And I want to make it in the way that represents me and represents my family. And to do that unapologetically.
You have to have a little bit of crazy for that.
You got to have a little bit.
You got to admit that we're all a little insane.
We got a little bit of it,
But it's what helps get us where we're going, is that little...
That's right.